Welcome back. In this video, we're going to discuss scope and what happens when variables go out of scope. We'll discuss four different types of scope, including statement scope, or the scope inside of statements such as if, else, while loops, etc. We'll discuss the scope inside of functions, as well as classes, and then we'll talk about global scope. So let's get started. We'll first discuss statement scope. Now let's say we have an if statement, and inside of the if statement body, we declare a new float variable called damage and initialize it. Now we can use this damage variable inside of the if statement body. But as soon as we reach the ending curly brace of the if statement, all variables declared inside of the if statement go out of scope, which means they get deleted. So later on, outside of the if statement, if you try to use this damage variable, as far as the compiler is concerned, this variable does not exist, and we say that it's gone out of scope. Now, scope is similar when it comes to functions. All variables declared inside of a function are local to that function. So if we declare a variable inside of a function, that variable does not exist outside of the function. So attempting to use it would be an error. We call this a local variable. Now, a function's input parameters are also local to the function, so attempting to use them outside of the function would also be an error. In all of these cases, the variables and input parameters are out of scope. Now let's talk about class scope. Let's say we have a class, and in our class we have a member variable. This member variable has class scope, meaning it only exists inside of the class. And to attempt to use this variable outside of the class would be an error. Now notice we can have functions that can access and change the variables that belong to the class. That's because class methods, or member functions, have access to variables in the class. Remember, private means inaccessible outside of the class, but class functions are inside the class. Now, something else to take note of is that there's a difference between a class and an instance of that class. A class is more like the schematics required to create a variable of that class, whereas an instance of the class is an actual object that exists in the code. So we can create one instance of the barbarian class and call its setDamage member function to set its damage member to a certain value. And then we could create another variable of type barbarian and set its damage member to a different value, and then we'd have two separate barbarian instances, each with their own unique value stored in their damage variable. Now let's discuss global scope. Let's say we have our main function and we declare a variable just outside of the main function. This variable has global scope, and we can use it anywhere in the program. We declare a global variable outside of all functions and outside of all classes. This variable exists everywhere in the program and will survive until the end of the program. So this float variable damage was declared outside the main function, so using it in the main function is valid since the variable has global scope. So in summary, we've learned about scope and four different types of scope, including statement scope, function scope, class scope, and global scope. Now we understand when it's appropriate to attempt to use certain variables in our program. I'll see you in the next video.